Right guys, today we're going to be making a syrup sponge. So this is a basic syrup sponge based on a recipe I saw on Saturday morning TV, to be honest, which I've then adapted to add some spices and things to make it a bit nicer. I have reduced this recipe down so that you can make it, this is a dirty tin because I've just taken the cake out. You can make it in a 20 centimetre cake tin, just like the one that I have asked you to all have. So 20 centimetre cake tin is what you're going to need. If you want to, you can double this and make it in a square 23 centimetre square tin, which is what you'd probably do with this sort of sponge, and then you cut it into squares as opposed to slices. So the purpose of this is that we are looking at the melting method. The melting method is one of our 5 methods of cake making, and it's where you melt the butter effectively. So brownies, they're the melting method. Gingerbread, as in like a Jamaican gingerbread, that's the melting method. And this syrup sponge is a melting method. The melting method gives you a much sort of denser, moister, richer cake than, say, the creaming or the whisking method. The difference is that, obviously you're melting the butter, but because you're not beating the butter like you do with the creaming method or whisking the eggs like you do with the whisking method, you're not incorporating any air. The only air that's going in is being produced by a chemical raising agent, which in this case is the baking powder in the self-raising flour. So what you're going to end up with, this cake is still slightly warm, so it's not going to cut brilliantly, but we'll do our best. What you end up with is like a dense, moist cake, which in this case, you do eat this one hot. You eat it hot with a bit of custard. So it's really, really soft and moist. Okay, right, let's go on and make it then. Okay guys, so like I said, this is the melting method. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to melt our fat. I've got here 100 grams of unsalted butter and 100 grams of soft, light brown sugar. If you wanted a richer flavour in your cake, you could use dark brown sugar. To this, I'm going to add 200 grams of golden syrup. $195. There we go. So 200 grams of golden syrup, and I'm going to put this, wiggle over here, onto a low heat, because we want all of this to melt. And actually we want it to melt, and then for this one we actually want it to bubble a little bit. Normally you wouldn't, but for this one I really want it to thoroughly melt and caramelize a tiny bit. One of the challenges with this recipe is, and it's not really a challenge, it's just a challenge for your patience, is that you have to melt this and then let it cool down before you can use it. You don't want to put just the sugar on the bottom, because the sugar will melt and burn before the butter has melted, if you've got your butter out of the fridge. I didn't, I have my butter left out on the side, so it's much softer. Anyway. That will melt with or without my help. So while that's doing that, I'm going to line my cake tin, and I'm going to weigh out all of my other ingredients, which is really only flour. Okay, so it's completely melted, and now you can see it's starting to just bubble a little bit around the edges. I don't want to feel any sort of lumps or anything in there. So I'm just going to let it bubble for a minute. So normally you wouldn't do this, but for this particular cake, this is what I want. This now needs to cool down. It is very, very hot, and it needs to cool down till it's about body temperature, because we're going to add the egg to this. And obviously if we added the egg right now, it would just cook. You'd end up with lumps of egg white. You can either just do this well ahead of time, go make yourself a cup of coffee and have a sip. Or what I normally do is put couple of inches, like that deep, of cold water in the bottom of the sink, and then plunge the bottom of the pan into the cold water. Just let it sit in the cold water with the cold water coming up just up the side, which will speed it all along a little bit. But you have to give it a stir every so often, because obviously the cold is coming in from the edges, and you want that to be more even. Okay, so this now needs to cool down. So while that's cooling down, you need to take your cake tin, just one like this, dent optional, grease the sides with some butter and line the middle with a bit of baking parchment. Now, the recipe calls for 140 millilitres of milk, which is an absolute pain to measure out. I would just weigh it. So pop it on the scales and just because with milk, the difference between a gram and a millimetre is minimal. Going to take our egg, that goes into there, along with one teaspoon of vanilla. And for this, I would just use some vanilla extract. You can use vanilla bean paste, never use vanilla flavouring. Well, I suppose you could, won't hurt. That one goes in. A good whisk and pop it to one side. Here I have 200 grams of self-raising flour. To that I'm going to add all of our spices. So we don't need to add any raising agent because the self-raising flour's already got baking powder in it. We are going to add, helps if you haven't got your spoon just wet, but never mind, it'll do. 1 teaspoon of mixed spice. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and then 3 teaspoons of ground ginger. 1, 2, So I'll tip that in, but if you really like ginger, you could add a little bit more. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. And then we're going to give that a really good mix together. Then you don't need to sieve anything. Okay, that is done. Right, so my my sugar, butter, golden syrup mix has been cooling in the sink, and it's not completely cold. It's about body temperature, which is what you're after. Can you see how thick it's gone compared to what it was? But yeah, we don't want it totally cold. We don't want it hot either, because we're going to add the milk now. Save this for a moment. So we're going to whisk in the milk and egg mix. Whoa, I made a lovely mess there. Don't do that. I am so messy. If you let this go too cold, it's really hard to mix this in. Too hot, and like I say, you'll end up with lumps of egg, cooked egg. Go right up against the sides and into the corners, because it tends to get a bit stuck. That looks foul, but it will make a delicious cake. Right, so, ugh, yuck. Yuck, yuck, yuck. There you go, nothing to see here. Okay, so we've got our dry ingredients, and we are going to add the wet. It's really not that complicated. You could do it a bit at a time, but why? Well, I don't know why, but nah. Make sure you get all of this in, especially if you spilt the half there over the edge when you're all mixing it. And then we're going to use a whisk to gently get this in. Because we're not trying to aerate it or anything, we're trying to break up the lumps. So we're not trying to whisk it like we'd whisk cream, we're not trying to be gently whisk it in. So I've preheated my oven to 150, which is very low, and it's going to cook sort of low and slow. It's 150 for 50 minutes with this size tin. Just your reminder that the cake batter needs to go in the tin, not stay in the bowl. Make sure you scrape out your bowl properly. This now goes in the oven for 50 minutes. Don't open that oven door. Off we go. Okay guys, so after 50 minutes, a skewer comes out clean. A skewer, not a knife. Not a knife. See, lovely golden brown, evenly risen, slightly come away from the edge, which tells us that it is done. I've taken 3 tablespoons of golden syrup and warmed it up in the microwave for about 15 to 20 seconds, no more than that, okay? And we're going to, with our skewer, stab, 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 or a cocktail stick would be even better, but who has cocktail sticks? Give it a decent stab, like you would a lemon drizzle. Cake tester, that would work better, but I don't own one, oddly enough. And while everything is still hot, we're going to brush over this extra golden syrup. Not one for the diabetics, this. So focus more on the middle, but obviously go right up to the edges. When you eat it, the edges are the best bit. And then we're going to let that cool in the tin for about, I don't know, 15 minutes or so. And then you can cut it and eat it with some custard or ice cream. Or, if you want to save it, let it cool down a little bit more. While it's still warm, put some greaseproof over the top and then wrap the whole thing in cling film. I know I normally tell you not to do that because it'll trap all the steam in and make it go, usually I say make it go all sweaty. But with this one, we want to trap the moisture in because it's like a really sort of dense, moist cake. It's more puddingy. It's more like a syrup pudding. So, like I say, either give it about 50, if you tried to cut it now, it would all just compress. All the air bubbles inside would just squidge back together. So give it at least 15 to 20 minutes before you try and cut it. Have it with custard, absolutely delicious. It's a lovely little pudding. Or leave it while it's still warm, cover the top with greaseproof because the sticky top will stick to the cling film and then rip the very top of the cake off, so you need a bit of greaseproof. Over the top and then wrap it all in cling film. Let it cool down completely before you then take it out and eat it. All right, have a go, guys.